They say blood is thicker than water, but they never warn you that family cuts the deepest. My sister Sarah thought her 2-carat diamond ring and 7-month baby bump made her a winner. Viewing my single status as a failure, she had no idea the stranger entering with a little girl was not a guest but a walking verdict. This lavish party was about to become a public trial where her mask would be stripped away. My name is Linda Stratton, to the outside world, and specifically to the people standing on the manicured lawn of this Hamptons estate. I am a 36-year-old spinster with a dull desk job. I am the sister who did not marry rich. I am the daughter who did not fulfill her potential as a decorative object in a high society marriage. They see a woman in a charcoal gray suit that they assume I bought off the rack at a department store sale, holding a glass of sparkling water because I'm too stiff to enjoy a midday cocktail. They are wrong about almost everything. I am a senior forensic accountant based in New York City. My job is not merely looking at spreadsheets. It is an autopsy of financial deception. I hunt down hidden assets. I trace embezzled funds through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, and I reconstruct destroyed ledgers for federal investigations. I do not just count money. I understand the psychology of greed, and because I understand the volatility of markets and the stupidity of consumer debt, I have quietly amassed a net worth of over $5 million. My portfolio is diversified, conservative, and liquid. I own my apartment in the city outright. I have zero debt. But my family knows none of this. To them, I am just Linda, the boring bean counter who drives a 10-year-old mid-range sedan. I parked that very sedan, a gray Toyota with a scratch on the rear bumper, far down the driveway, tucked behind a line of Bentley SUVs and Porsche Cayennes. I drove this car for a reason. It is a shield. In my family, perceived wealth is blood in the water, and my parents are sharks who never learned how to hunt, only how to scavenge. If they knew I had $5 million sitting in Vanguard accounts and municipal bonds, the guilt trips for vacations, home renovations, and emergency loans would be relentless. So, I play the role they assigned me, the struggling, frugal sister who pinches pennies because she has to, not because she chooses to. Walking up the driveway of the estate where my sister Sarah lived, I felt that familiar itch in the back of my brain. It is a professional hazard. I look at a building and I do not see architecture. I see equity and leverage. This house, a sprawling white colonial revival with columns that looked slightly too large for the structure, was valued at roughly $4 million in the current market. My brother-in-law, Mark, claimed to have bought it outright last year. Mark is a real estate investor, a title that usually means unemployed gambler with access to a line of credit. The invitation had called this a royal baby shower. As I stepped through the massive double doors, it became clear that they were not using the term ironically. The foyer was suffocating. The air smelled of expensive perfume and desperation. In the center of the main hall stood a champagne tower that reached nearly to the chandelier. It was built with crystal coupes, not glass, and the champagne flowing down it was vintage Dom Perignon. I did the mental math instantly. 3 cases, minimum. That was thousands of dollars just being poured onto the floor for a 3-hour event. I walked deeper into the house, my heels clicking on the marble floors. The floral arrangements were staggering. White peonies and soft pink hydrangeas were cascading from every surface. It is February. Peonies are out of season in the northern hemisphere. These had to have been flown in from a greenhouse in Holland or perhaps as far away as South America or France. The logistics alone would cost more than my annual bonus 3 years ago. $30,000, I whispered to myself, estimating the floral budget. Minimum. I scanned the room. The guests were exactly who I expected them to be. Women with faces pulled tight by surgeons and marriages held together by prenuptial agreements. Men in linen suits who laughed too loudly, their eyes constantly darting around the room to see who was watching them. They were discussing summer rentals in Ibiza and the wait list for the new Birkin bag. It was a carnival of narcissism. I felt a profound sense of isolation, but it was not the isolation of loneliness. It was the isolation of a sober person at a fraternity party. I knew something they did not. I read the financial news. I knew the housing market in the Hamptons had cooled by 12% in the last quarter. I knew interest rates were climbing, squeezing variable rate mortgages until they popped. I looked at this party, this excessive display of liquidity, and I did not see wealth. I saw a burn rate. Linda, good Lord, look at you. The voice was shrill and familiar. I turned to see my mother, Carol, marching toward me with a glass of white wine in her hand. My father, Robert, trailed behind her, looking uncomfortable in a pastel blue blazer. "Hello, Mother." "Hello, Dad," I said, keeping my voice neutral. My mother stopped a foot away from me, her eyes scanning me up and down with open disdain. She reached out and flicked the lapel of my blazer. "It is a celebration, Linda," she hissed. "Could you not have worn something brighter? You look like you're going to a deposition." "I came from the office. Mom," I lied. I had actually come from my apartment, where I had spent an hour choosing the most nondescript outfit possible. "Always working," my father grumbled, taking a sip of his drink. "You know, Mark took the day off. A man who makes real money knows how to delegate. You work like a mule, and for what? A salary?" He said the word salary like it was a slur. "I do all right," I said calmly. "Look at your sister," my mother said, gesturing toward the grand staircase. "Just look at her." Sarah was descending the stairs. She was indeed a spectacle. She wore a custom-made maternity gown that trailed behind her, encrusted with crystals that caught the light. She looked beautiful. I could not deny that. Sarah had always been the beautiful one. She was the golden child, the one who was promised the world simply because she existed. She was 7 months pregnant and glowing with the smug satisfaction of a woman who believes she has won the game of life. "She looks happy," I said. "She is wealthy, Linda," my mother corrected me. "That is what happy looks like." Mark just closed a deal worth $10 million. $10 million. Can you imagine? And here you are, driving that piece of junk car and living in that shoebox in the city. My shoebox was a 2,000-square-foot loft in Tribeca. But I nodded. "I am happy for them, Mom. Try to look like it," she snapped. "And go get a drink. You're making people nervous standing there like a security guard." I watched them walk away, heading toward the VIP section near the champagne tower. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of imported flowers and expensive cologne. I needed to maintain my cover. I walked toward the bar, but I did not want alcohol. Alcohol dulls the senses. Alcohol makes you miss details. In my line of work, a missing detail is the difference between a conviction and an acquittal. I approached a passing server, a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. He was holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres, caviar on blinis. "Sparkling water with lime, please," I said. He nodded, but as he turned to signal the bartender, I noticed something. His uniform was impeccable, but his eyes were tired, and there was a tightness in his jaw. He maneuvered toward the service station, and I drifted closer, pretending to admire a painting on the wall. Another server, a young woman, was aggressively polishing a glass. "Did you ask him?" the young woman whispered. Her voice was strained. "I asked the manager," the young man replied, keeping his voice low. "He said Mr. Stratton, the husband, Mark, said the transfer is pending. It is the weekend. Banks are closed." "My rent is due on Tuesday," the woman hissed. "They have not paid the agency for the last 3 events. If I do not get paid today, I am walking out." "Keep it down," the young man warned, glancing around. "Just get through the shift. Look at this place. They have the money. It is just a liquidity thing." I moved away before they could spot me, my heart rate remaining perfectly steady. A liquidity thing, that is the oldest lie in the book. When you are spending $50,000 on a party, but you cannot pay the catering staff their $200 for the day, you do not have a liquidity problem. You have an insolvency problem. I took a sip of the sparkling water the waiter eventually brought me. It was cold and sharp. I looked around the room with fresh eyes. The signs were there if you knew how to look. The champagne was flowing. Yes. But I noticed the labels on the wine bottles being served to the peripheral guests were different from the ones on the main tower. A cheaper vintage. The security at the door were not private detail. They were rented from a generic event staffing agency. And I spotted my brother-in-law across the room. He was holding court with a group of men, laughing at a joke, but his laughter was too loud. It went on for a second too long. And every 30 seconds, like a nervous tick, his hand went to his pocket to check his phone. He was sweating. It was 68 degrees in the house, perfectly climate-controlled. Yet there was a sheen of perspiration on his upper lip. He looked like a man waiting for a bomb to go off. I felt a strange calmness settle over me. This was familiar territory. This was the moment before the raid. This was the moment when the Ponzi scheme is still spinning, but the friction is starting to smoke. I walked over to a high-top table near the edge of the room, positioning myself so I could see the entire floor. My parents were fawning over Sarah, who was now sitting on a velvet throne. Literally, a rented velvet throne, accepting compliments. "Linda!" Sarah had spotted me. She waved her hand, the 2-carat diamond flashing under the crystal chandelier. "Come here! Don't be antisocial." I forced a smile onto my face. It was a muscle memory. I walked toward the throne, feeling the eyes of the room turn to me. I could hear their thoughts. The poor sister, the ugly duckling, the failure. "Hello, Sarah," I said, leaning in to kiss her cheek. "You look beautiful." "I know," she laughed, patting her stomach. "Can you believe all this? Mark outdid himself. He said, 'Nothing but the best for my queen.' Did you see the ice sculpture?" "I did," I said. "It is impressive." "It is imported ice," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "From a glacier or something. I do not even ask the price anymore. Mark says worrying about price tags is a poverty mindset." "Is that so?" I asked. "Oh, don't give me that look. Linda," Sarah rolled her eyes, "I know you count every penny. That is fine for you. But Mark operates on a different level. You have to spend money to make money. That is what you never understood." "I suppose not," I said. "By the way," Sarah said, loud enough for the surrounding circle of admirers to hear, "did you bring a gift? Or did you just bring yourself?" The women around her tittered. "It is on the table," I said. "It is a contribution to a college savings plan for the baby, $5,000. Sarah's face fell for a fraction of a second before she recovered with a patronizing smile. "Oh, practical. Thank you. Well, thank you. Linda, every little bit helps, I guess. Although Mark has already set up a trust fund, so your little contribution might just be pocket money for the nanny." The crowd laughed. It was a cruel, sharp sound. I stood there, taking it. I let the humiliation wash over me. Not because I was weak, but because I was gathering evidence. Her arrogance was a data point. Her blindness was a data point. She genuinely believed this life was real. She believed the ice was from a glacier and the money was endless. "I'm going to get some air," I said. "Don't go too far," Sarah called out as I turned away. "We are doing speeches soon. I have a special shout-out for you." I walked away, my grip tightening on my glass of water. I needed to get away from the perfume and the lies. I needed to analyze what I had seen. The unpaid staff, the nervous husband, the excessive spending during a market downturn. As I moved toward the French doors that led to the garden, I passed Mark. He was cornered by two men in dark suits. They did not look like party guests. They were not holding drinks. One of them was speaking close to Mark's ear, and Mark looked like he was about to vomit. I slowed my pace, straining my ears. "Deadline was yesterday. Mark," the man was saying. "The bridge loan is default. We are not playing games." "Monday," Mark whispered, his voice cracking. "I swear, Monday. The funds are clearing." "You said that last week." I kept walking, my face impassive. So, it was not just insolvency, it was predatory lending. Bridge loans, that meant high interest, short terms, and aggressive collection tactics. Mark was not just broke, he was drowning. And judging by the size of this party, he was trying to bail out the Titanic with a golden spoon. I pushed open the French doors and stepped out onto the terrace. The cold air hit me, a welcome relief from the stifling heat of the lies inside. I walked down the stone steps toward the garden, away from the noise. I thought I was alone, but as I turned the corner toward the old fountain, I realized I was not. The real story was about to begin, and I had no idea that my $5 million secret was the least interesting thing that was going to happen today. The atmosphere inside the mansion had shifted from merely stifling to actively hostile, at least from my perspective. I had stepped back inside from the terrace, deciding that hiding in the garden would only give my mother more ammunition to call me antisocial. I needed to endure this. I needed to witness the spectacle so that later, when they asked why I was not supportive, I could list exactly what I had supported. Sarah was holding court in the center of the living room, seated on a high-backed velvet chair that looked suspiciously like a prop from a period drama. She was surrounded by a phalanx of women who were cooing over her swollen ankles, as if water retention were a heroic achievement. I watched my sister bask in the adoration. She had a hand resting protectively over her baby bump, a gesture that would have been maternal if her other hand was not aggressively displaying the diamond ring that I strongly suspected was paste. I approached the circle, clutching my small, sensible envelope. It was time for the gift presentation. Sarah had insisted on opening gifts in front of everyone, a tradition I found tacky, but which fit perfectly with her need for an audience. "Oh, look who decided to join us," Sarah announced, her voice pitching up an octave to feign delight. "It is Linda. Everyone, make room for the career woman." The circle parted, and I felt the collective weight of 20 pairs of judgmental eyes. I stepped forward and extended the envelope. "For the baby," I said quietly. "It is not much to look at now, but it will be useful later." Sarah took the envelope with a perfectly manicured hand. She tore it open with zero hesitation, bypassing the thoughtful card I had written to get straight to the financial instrument inside. She pulled out the document confirming the initial deposit into a 529 college savings plan. "Oh," Sarah said. Her smile faltered, then froze into a rigid mask of polite disappointment. "A savings account. It is a college fund," I clarified, ignoring the titters from the women around her. "I started it with $5,000. With compound interest, by the time the baby is 18, it will cover a significant portion of tuition." Sarah let the paper drop onto the pile of discarded wrapping paper as if it were a used napkin. "That is so responsible of you, Linda," she said, her tone dripping with pity. "Mark and I are not really worried about tuition. We expect the real estate portfolio to be generating 7 figures of passive income by then. But thank you. I am sure it will pay for textbooks, or maybe a meal plan." The women laughed. It was a soft, tinkling sound, like ice hitting glass. "Actually," Sarah continued, her eyes lighting up as she gestured to a massive box behind her, "look what Shelby brought. It is the new Stroll Air Limited Edition. The frame is plated in 24-karat gold. Can you believe it? Gold. Now that is how you welcome a princess into the world." I looked at the stroller. It was a monstrosity. It was gaudy, impractical, and heavy. It screamed new money so loudly it hurt my ears. "It is very shiny," I said neutrally. "It is exclusive." Sarah corrected me. "But I guess when you are crunching numbers all day in a cubicle, you lose touch with what is in style. Do not worry, Linda. We love the bank account. It is very you, very beige." I stepped back, swallowing the retort that was burning a hole in my throat. I wanted to tell her that the gold plating on that stroller would flake off in 6 months, whereas compound interest was the only force in the universe that actually grew stronger with time. But I stayed silent. I was a guest. I was the sister. I retreated to the periphery, seeking a corner where I could observe without being a target. That is when I saw Mark again. My brother-in-law was standing near the buffet table, but he was not eating. He was staring at a platter of imported oysters with the intensity of a man on death row looking at his last meal. He was holding a tumbler of amber liquid, whiskey, likely aged, definitely expensive. His hand was trembling. I watched him, in my line of work. Body language is a balance sheet. It tells you what the numbers are trying to hide. Mark was wearing a suit that probably cost $3,000, but he looked like he wanted to crawl out of his own skin. He kept tapping his pocket, checking his phone, then shoving it back. He would glance at the front door, then at Sarah, then down at his shoes. He saw me looking at him. For a split second, our eyes locked. In that moment, I saw sheer, unadulterated terror. He did not wave. He did not smile. He turned his back to me abruptly, pretending to be engrossed in a conversation with a waiter. "Why are you so afraid of me, Mark?" I wondered. "Is it because I am the buzzkill sister-in-law? Or is it because you know exactly what I do for a living, and you know that I can smell a fraud from a mile away?" Before I could analyze Mark's behavior further, I was ambushed. Well, if it is not the elusive Linda, I suppressed a sigh and turned to face my Aunt Barbara and Aunt Susan. They were the family's twin pillars of judgment. Women who believed a woman's worth was directly correlated to the size of her husband's paycheck and the number of children she had produced. "Hello, Aunt Barbara, Aunt Susan," I said, forcing a polite nod. "We were just saying," Aunt Barbara began, sipping her champagne, "that you look tired. Dear, are you working too hard? You have those lines around your eyes." "I am fine," I said. "Just a busy quarter." "Busy, busy, busy," Aunt Susan clucked her tongue. "That is all we ever hear from you. Meanwhile, look at Sarah, 7 months pregnant and she looks fresh as a daisy. That is what happiness does for a woman. Linda, it is a natural glow." "Sarah has a team of stylists," I pointed out, "and she does not work." "She works at making a home," Aunt Barbara snapped. "That is the hardest job of all. Not that you would know. Tell me, is there anyone special? Or are you still married to your calculator?" "I am focusing on my career," I said. The standard deflection I had used for a decade. "Career," Aunt Susan scoffed. "A career will not keep you warm at night. Linda, it will not visit you in the nursing home. You are 36. Do you know what the statistics say about women over 35? The odds drop off a cliff. You are playing a dangerous game." "I am quite content," I lied. "She is just picky," Sarah's voice cut in. She had finished opening gifts and had drifted over. Sensing an opportunity to pile on, she wrapped an arm around Aunt Susan, beaming. "Do not be too hard on her. Auntie, Linda is just independent. She has to be. She is scraping by on that salary of hers, counting every penny. She does not have the luxury of time to date. She is too busy trying to pay her rent." My mother, who had materialized beside Sarah like a shark sensing blood, nodded in agreement. "It is true," my mother said, looking at me with a mixture of disappointment and embarrassment. "We keep telling her to let Mark help her with investments. He could triple her savings in a month, but she is so stubborn. She prefers to struggle. It is some sort of martyr complex." "I do not struggle, Mother," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "I live within my means." "Means?" Sarah laughed. A harsh, jagged sound. "Linda, you drove here in a car that sounds like a lawnmower. Mark offered to lease you a BMW, and you said no. Who says no to a free BMW? A crazy person, that is who." "I prefer to own my assets," I said. "Please do not lease them." "Boring," Sarah sang out. Turning to the crowd, "Isn't she boring, everyone? My big sister, the human sedative." The group laughed. I felt the heat rise in my cheeks, but I clamped down on my reaction. I looked past them, scanning the room, needing to disconnect from their toxicity. That is when I noticed the men in the corner. There were 3 of them. They were standing near the archway that led to the kitchen, holding crystal glasses of water, not wine. They were not mingling. They were scanning the room, their eyes locking onto Mark every time he moved. They were dressed in suits, but the fit was wrong. The jackets were too tight across the shoulders. The fabric slightly shiny under the lights. Polyester blends, not wool. They looked like security guards trying to blend in at a wedding. But they were not security. I knew security. Security watches the exits and the guests. These men were watching only one person, Mark. I focused on the tallest one. He had a thick neck and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He checked his watch, then tapped his earpiece. These were not investors. Investors do not loom. Investors do not drink tap water at an open bar. Investors do not look like they are calculating the physical distance between themselves and the host's kneecaps. These were collectors, and not the legal kind who send certified letters. These were the kind who were sent when the certified letters had been ignored for too long. I looked back at Mark. He was wiping sweat from his forehead with a cocktail napkin. He had seen them too. He was trapped. He was a rat in a maze made of imported flowers and rented furniture, and the cats were waiting by the kitchen door. "Linda, are you even listening?" My mother's voice snapped me back to the circle of hell I was currently standing in. "I am listening," I said. "I was saying," my mother continued, her voice booming so that half the room could hear, "that you should look at your sister and take notes. Sarah is the pride of this family. She has secured her future. She has brought honor to us. She is everything a Stratton woman should be, graceful, successful, and adored. You could learn a lot from her if you stopped being so jealous." Jealous? The word hung in the air. I looked at Sarah, who was preening under the praise. I looked at Mark, who was vibrating with terror across the room. I looked at the thugs in the corner who were mentally appraising the furniture. "I am not jealous, Mother," I said slowly. "I am observant." "Oh, stop it." Sarah dismissed me with a wave of her hand. "Let her be. Mom, some people are just destined to be the background characters in other people's stories. Linda is excellent at being invisible. It is her superpower." 2 hours, I told myself silently. 120 minutes. I checked my watch. It was a simple, stainless steel timepiece, not the diamond-encrusted monstrosity Sarah wore. It kept perfect time. "I am going to get another water," I said, excusing myself. "Get a real drink," Sarah shouted after me. "Loosen up. Maybe if you get drunk enough, you will become interesting." I walked away, my spine straight, my heels clicking a steady rhythm on the floor. The air in the room felt thick, heavy with the weight of unsaid truths and impending disaster. The scent of the lilies was overpowering now, cloying and funereal. I made my way toward the bar, but I kept my eyes on the investors. One of them moved, stepping slightly forward to block Mark's path to the hallway. Mark saw him and veered sharply toward the bathroom. It was a dance, a predatory dance happening right in the middle of a baby shower, and I was the only one in the audience who knew the steps. The contrast was nauseating. On one side, my family was tearing me down for my perceived poverty, mocking my $5,000 gift and elevating Sarah to the status of a deity. On the other side, the entire foundation of their arrogance was crumbling in real time. I reached the bar and asked for a lime wedge with my water. As I waited, I looked at the guests laughing, drinking, oblivious. They were celebrating a house of cards. They were toasting a mirage. I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It was not anger anymore. It was not even hurt. It was the cold, hard clarity of a forensic accountant looking at a fraudulent ledger. The numbers did not add up. The assets were non-existent. The liabilities were walking through the kitchen door. And the audit was about to begin. The gentle hum of conversation died down as the music faded. A sharp feedback whine from a microphone pierced the air, causing several guests to wince and cover their ears. It was time. The main event was beginning. At the far end of the grand salon, a small stage had been erected. It was carpeted in plush white velvet and surrounded by an army of white roses. There were thousands of them, arranged in dense, suffocating walls that framed the platform. It looked less like a celebration of life and more like a shrine to a deity, and in the center of that shrine stood Sarah. She held the microphone with a practiced delicacy, her pinky finger extended, the light catching the facets of her jewelry. She waited for total silence, her eyes sweeping the room with a look of benevolent ownership. She was savoring this. This was her drug, the undivided attention of wealthy people, the envy of her peers, and the submissiveness of her family. Testing, testing, she purred into the mic. Her voice boomed through the high-end speakers rented for the occasion. Can everyone hear me? Good. She cleared her throat. A theatrical little sound. I want to thank you all for coming to our humble home, she began. The word humble was chosen with zero self-awareness. Considering she was standing in front of a 10-foot floral wall inside a mansion that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. Mark and I are so blessed, truly. When we found out we were expecting, Mark said to me, Sarah, we have to celebrate this right. We have to show the world what love looks like. She paused for applause. The room obliged. I stood near a marble pillar in the back, my hands clasped in front of me, watching the performance. I felt like an anthropologist observing a strange, primitive ritual where the currency was validation. It has been a whirlwind year, Sarah continued, her hand drifting to her belly. Mark closed the biggest deal of his career this week, $10 million. A gasp went through the crowd. More applause. I saw Mark in the shadows near the kitchen door. He did not look like a man who had closed a $10 million deal. He looked like a man who was calculating the distance to the nearest exit. He shrank back as Sarah mentioned his name, but she was too absorbed in her monologue to notice his panic. But today is not about money, Sarah said, her voice dropping to a register of mock humility. It is about family. It is about the people who support us, no matter what. My stomach tightened. I knew that tone. I had heard it at every Thanksgiving, every Christmas, every birthday since I was 12 years old. It was the tone she used right before she inserted the knife. Her eyes scanned the room, bypassing her husband, bypassing our parents, and landing directly on me. And speaking of family, Sarah said, a bright, predatory smile stretching across her face. I want to give a special thank you to my big sister, Linda. Where are you? Linda, raise your hand. The spotlight, whether literal or metaphorical, swung toward me. Heads turned. The crowd parted slightly, leaving me exposed near the pillar. I did not raise my hand. I simply stood there, locking eyes with her. There she is, Sarah chirped. Everyone, give it up for Linda. A smattering of polite applause followed. I nodded once, stiffly. You know, Sarah said, leaning into the microphone as if sharing a secret with the room, it really means so much to me that you are here. Linda, I know how hard this must be for you. The room went quiet. The air grew heavy. I mean, Sarah continued, her voice dripping with syrupy concern. Watching your little sister have everything you ever wanted? It takes a big person to swallow that kind of jealousy. I look at you, and I just think, wow, if I were 36, unmarried, and living alone in the city, I do not think I could be as brave as you are. I felt the blood drain from my face. It was not a blush of embarrassment. It was the cold shock of betrayal. She was not just teasing me. She was dismantling me. She was using my life, my choices, my privacy as a stepping stone to elevate her own status. By painting me as the tragic failure, she made herself the triumphant queen. It is just so pitiful, isn't it? Sarah asked the crowd, phrasing it as a rhetorical question but waiting for an answer. A woman without a family is like a house without furniture, empty, cold, but you are strong. Linda, you survive. A ripple of laughter moved through the room. It started with her sycophantic friends, the ones who would laugh at anything she said as long as the champagne kept flowing. Then it spread. Men in suits chuckled into their drinks. Women covered their mouths to hide their smirks. They were laughing at me. They saw a woman in a gray suit, standing alone, and they accepted Sarah's narrative without question. To them, I was the cautionary tale. I was the before picture in a makeover commercial. But Sarah was not done. She had tasted blood. and she wanted more. "But do not worry, big sis," Sarah said, her voice bright and helpful. "Mark and I were talking just the other day. We want to help. You know, Mark has a lot of security guards at his construction sites. Some of them are single. They are a bit older, maybe in their late 50s, mostly retired. But hey, beggars cannot be choosers, right?" The laughter exploded. It was a roar this time. "At least you would have someone to push your wheelchair when you get old," Sarah shouted over the laughter. Delighted with her own wit, "Mark can set you up. Just give him your resume. I'm sure they would love a woman who is low maintenance." I stood frozen. The insult was so gross, so classless, that it took a moment to fully process. She was suggesting that because I was single, I should be grateful for the scraps of her husband's payroll. She was reducing my entire existence, my career, my intellect, my $5 million net worth, down to a desperate need for male validation. I looked for an ally. I looked for anyone in the room who found this cruel. I looked at my parents. My mother, Carol, was standing near the front of the stage. She was not frowning. She was not signaling Sarah to stop. She was laughing. She had her head thrown back, her hand clutching her chest, laughing at the joke her golden child had made at the expense of her other daughter. My father was chuckling too, shaking his head with a grin that said, "Oh, that's Sarah. She is a pistol." That was the moment. That was the moment the bridge burned. I had spent my entire adult life trying to buy their approval with compliance. I had hidden my success so I would not outshine Sarah. I had driven a cheap car so they would not feel threatened. I had endured their criticism, their neglect, their constant comparisons, thinking that if I just stayed quiet and played my role, they would eventually love me for who I was. But they did not love me. They did not even respect me. To them, I was a punchline. I was a prop in Sarah's play, meant to be kicked around to make the protagonist look better. The laughter of the crowd swirled around me like toxic smoke. I felt a physical pain in my chest, a tightening of the muscles around my heart. It was not shame. I was not ashamed of who I was. I was a forensic accountant. I brought down criminals. I solved puzzles that baffled the FBI. I was powerful. The pain was grief. I was grieving the family I wished I had. I was grieving the sister I thought loved me. I was grieving the parents who were supposed to protect me. But as I watched my mother wipe a tear of laughter from her eye, the grief hardened. It crystallized into something cold and sharp. It turned into ice. I looked at Sarah on the stage. She was beaming, waiting for me to react. She wanted me to cry. She wanted me to storm out in a huff so she could play the victim and say, "See? She is so unstable." Or she wanted me to laugh along. To accept my humiliation and validate her superiority, I did neither. My face went completely blank. I shut down every micro-expression. I became the accountant. I became the auditor entering a room full of guilty executives. I was holding a crystal glass of sparkling water. I looked at it. Then, with deliberate, slow movements, I extended my arm over the small cocktail table next to me. I set the glass down. Clink. The sound was soft, barely audible over the laughter. But to me, it sounded like a gavel hitting a judge's bench. It was a decisive, final sound. I did not look at Sarah again. She was no longer my sister. She was a target of an investigation. She was a liability. I did not look at my parents. They were complicit parties. I turned on my heel. My movement was precise, military. I did not run. I did not hunch my shoulders. I walked with my head high, my back straight, cutting through the crowd like a shark moving through a school of fish. "Oh, looks like she cannot take a joke." Sarah's voice rang out over the speakers, followed by more jeering. "Go have a cry, Linda. We will save you a slice of cake." I kept walking. The faces of the guests blurred as I passed them. I saw their teeth, their jewelry, their hollow eyes. They were ghosts. They did not matter. I reached the large glass sliding doors at the back of the room. I grabbed the handle, cool, smooth metal, and slid the door open. The rush of fresh, cold air hit me instantly, cleansing the perfume and the stench of hypocrisy from my lungs. I stepped out onto the patio and slid the door shut behind me, muting the sound of the laughter. Silence. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the oxygen I had been denied inside. My hands were not shaking. My heart rate was already slowing down, returning to its resting baseline of 60 beats per minute. The anger was still there, but it was no longer a hot fire. It was a cold engine, humming, ready to work. I walked to the edge of the stone terrace and looked out at the sprawling backyard. It was a mess. From the window, it had looked manicured, but up close, I could see the truth. The grass was overgrown in patches. There were weeds choking the expensive rose bushes. A plastic tarp was hastily thrown over a pile of construction debris near the gazebo. It was a perfect metaphor for Sarah's life, a beautiful facade hiding rot and neglect. I needed to think. I needed to formulate a strategy. I was not going to leave. Leaving would be a retreat. I was going to stay. I was going to watch this house of cards fall. And I was going to be the one to open the windows and let the wind in. I descended the stone steps into the garden, my heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. I walked toward the old stone fountain in the center of the yard. It was dry, filled with dead leaves. I thought I was alone with my rage. I thought I was the only person on this property who saw the cracks in the foundation. But as I rounded the hedge, I saw a flash of blue. Someone else was out here. Someone else had escaped the circus inside. And suddenly, the day that had been defined by humiliation was about to offer me the weapon I needed to strike back. The universe, it seemed, had a sense of justice after all. The silence of the garden was a physical weight, heavy and grounding after the shrill cacophony of the party inside. I walked away from the house, my heels sinking slightly into the earth. I needed distance. I needed to put as much physical space as possible between myself and the microphone. The laughter and the suffocating scent of those white roses. As I moved deeper into the grounds, the facade of the perfect Hamptons estate began to dissolve, revealing the truth beneath. From the terrace, the lawn had looked green and manicured, but down here, at ground level, the reality was a forensic accountant's dream or a homeowner's nightmare. I stopped to inspect a patch of grass near a sculpted hedge. It was not just overgrown, it was infested. Crabgrass had begun to choke out the expensive Kentucky bluegrass. There were dandelions poking their yellow heads up through the borders of the flower beds. To the untrained eye, it just looked a little messy. To me, it was a timestamp. This level of neglect did not happen overnight. It took at least 3 months for weeds to encroach this aggressively. That meant the landscaping contract had been canceled 90 days ago. 90 days? That aligned perfectly with the end of the fiscal quarter. Mark had stopped paying the gardener 3 months ago. I continued walking, feeling a grim satisfaction in my diagnosis. The evidence was everywhere. The boxwood hedges were shaggy, losing their sharp, geometric shapes. There were dead leaves piled up against the base of the oak trees, rotting and uncollected. This was a property in distress, masquerading as a palace. I reached the center of the garden, where a large stone fountain stood. It was an impressive structure, tiered with mythological figures, likely Italian in design, but it was silent. The basin was dry, save for a layer of brown sludge and wind-blown debris at the bottom. A pump for a fountain this size uses a significant amount of electricity. Turning it off was a desperate attempt to lower the utility bill. I was not alone. Sitting on the wide stone rim of the dry fountain was a child. She was a little girl, perhaps 6 years old. She was wearing a pale blue dress that looked like it was made of clouds, soft, airy, and impeccably tailored. She had a ribbon in her hair the exact same shade of blue. She was sitting with her back to the house, staring intently at a line of ants marching across the stone. She did not look like the other children I had seen at the party earlier. The ones running around screaming, hopped up on sugar, destroying the decor. She was still, composed. I hesitated, not wanting to disturb her, but my shoe scuffed against a piece of loose slate. The girl turned her head. Her eyes were large, dark, and startlingly intelligent. She looked at me without fear, studying my face with a level of scrutiny that reminded me unnervingly of myself. "Hello?" I said softly, keeping my distance so as not to startle her. She did not return the greeting immediately. She tilted her head to the side. "Are you the lady they were laughing at?" she asked. Her voice was clear and precise, lacking the shy mumbling typical of children her age. The question hit me in the chest. But strangely, it did not hurt coming from her. It was just a fact, a data point she was trying to verify. I let out a short, dry breath that was almost a laugh. "Yes, I suppose I am." The girl nodded, accepting the confirmation. She turned her attention back to the ants. "My dad says they are idiots," she stated matter-of-factly. I blinked, taken aback. "I beg your pardon?" She looked up at me again. "The people inside. My dad says they are a confederacy of dunces. I do not know what a confederacy is, but I know what a dunce is. It means they are stupid." I felt the tension in my shoulders drop by an inch. "Your dad sounds like an observant man." "He is," she said. "He says laughing at someone for being alone is the lowest form of humor. He says it shows a lack of character." I walked closer and sat down on the rim of the fountain. A few feet away from her, the stone was cold through the fabric of my suit trousers. "Well," I said, looking at the house where the muffled sound of music was still thumping, "you can tell your dad that I agree with his assessment." "I like your suit," the girl said, pivoting the conversation with the abruptness of a child. "It is gray, like a storm cloud." "Thank you," I said, smoothing the lapel of my jacket. "Most people think it is boring. They prefer sparkles." "Sparkles are cheap," she declared, sounding like a 40-year-old fashion editor. "My dad says true quality whispers. It does not scream." I stared at this child. She was extraordinary. "What is your name?" "Emily," she said. "What is yours?" "Linda." "Linda." She tested the name on her tongue. "That is a nice name. It means beautiful in Spanish. Did you know that?" I did. I smiled. A genuine smile this time. Although I think my sister would disagree with the definition today. "Your sister is the loud one in the white dress," Emily said. It was not a question. "The one who looks like a wedding cake." I laughed. I actually laughed out loud. "Yes, that is her." "She is mean," Emily said simply. "I do not like her." "I am struggling to like her myself right now," I admitted. We sat in silence for a moment, two outcasts in the overgrown garden of a crumbling empire. I looked at Emily's dress again, up close. The quality was undeniable. The fabric was silk organza. The hem was hand-stitched. This was not a department store dress. This was couture. "You have a smudge on your cheek," a deep voice said from behind me. I jumped, spinning around on the stone rim. Emerging from the deep shadows cast by a row of ancient oak trees was a man. He must have been standing there the whole time, perfectly still, watching us. He stepped into the dappled sunlight. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that filled out a dark navy suit. He looked to be about 40 years old. His hair was dark, touched with silver at the temples, and his face was striking. Strong jaw, aquiline nose, and eyes that were the same dark, intelligent shade as Emily's. But it was his presence that struck me first. He did not walk. He occupied space. He moved with a deliberate, predatory grace that I recognized instantly. It was the walk of a man who owned the ground beneath his feet. "I apologize," he said, his voice a rich baritone that seemed to vibrate in the cool air. "I did not mean to startle you, and I apologize for my daughter's candor. Emily has not yet learned the art of social lying." "I prefer the truth," I said, standing up and brushing the dust from my pants. "It is a rare commodity today." He walked toward us, stopping a respectful distance away. He reached into his breast pocket and withdrew a handkerchief. It was white silk, folded into a perfect square. "For your cheek," he said, extending it to me. "I believe you have a bit of dust from the fountain." I took the handkerchief. It was cool and smooth. In the corner, Embroidered in navy thread were the initials LKV. "Thank you," I said, dabbing at my face. I looked at him, my professional instincts kicking into overdrive. I scanned him the way I scanned a balance sheet, looking for assets and liabilities. The suit was bespoke. I could tell by the functional buttonholes on the sleeves and the way the fabric draped without a single wrinkle across his chest. It was Super 180s wool, likely Italian. A suit like that cost upwards of $6,000. His shoes were Oxfords, whole-cut leather, hand-polished to a mirror shine. No scuffs, no wear. Those were easily $2,000. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe Calatrava, understated, classic, worth $30,000, minimum. This man was not just rich, he was wealthy. There is a difference. Mark was rich, flashy, loud, leveraged to the hilt. This man was wealthy, quiet, solid, and terrifyingly liquid. And he was not wearing a name tag. He was not holding a drink. He was not sweating. "You are not a guest," I said. It was a statement, not a question. A faint smile touched the corners of his mouth. It was not a nice smile. It was sharp. "What gave me away?" he asked. Was it the lack of a name tag? Or the fact that I am not currently congratulating your brother-in-law on his fictional success? "It is the suit," I said bluntly. "And the shoes? You are wearing about $40,000 worth of clothing to a backyard barbecue, and you are sober. The only people sober at a party like this are the staff, the police, or the people who are about to ruin someone's day." He laughed, a low, genuine sound that made Emily look up and grin. "Emily was right," he said, looking at me with a new gleam of interest in his eyes. "You are not like them. You are sharp." "I am an accountant," I said. I noticed discrepancies. "An accountant," he mused. "That explains the intelligent eyes. I am Arthur Vance." The name hit me like a physical blow. Arthur Vance. I kept my face neutral, but my mind was racing. Arthur Vance was a legend in the financial world. He was the CEO of Vance Capital, a private equity firm known for its aggressive acquisitions and ruthless efficiency. They called him the Vulture of Wall Street, but that was just jealousy. He was brilliant. He bought distressed assets, cleaned them up, and sold them for massive profits. He was also one of the most powerful men in New York. "Linda Stratton," I said, extending my hand. He took it. His grip was firm, dry, and cool. "Stratton," he repeated. "The sister." "Unfortunately," I said. He released my hand and looked toward the house. The music had switched to a loud, thumping pop song. "I am not here for the baby shower." "Linda," Arthur said quietly. The playfulness was gone from his voice, replaced by a steely seriousness. "I was not invited." "I figured that out," I said. "Mark usually only invites people he thinks he can borrow money from. I doubt he would have the courage to ask you." "Mark owes me something far more valuable than a loan," Arthur said. "He owes me integrity, and since he cannot pay that back, I am here to collect the collateral." I looked at the house, then back at Arthur. The pieces were starting to click together. The unpaid staff, the neglected garden, the desperation in Mark's eyes, and now Arthur Vance is standing in the weeds. "What did he do?" I asked. Arthur looked down at Emily, who was now braiding the grass blades together. "Emily," he said gently, "why don't you tell Miss Linda what we talked about in the car?" Emily looked up, her expression serious. "The house?" she said. I looked at the sprawling white mansion. "What about the house?" Emily stood up and brushed off her dress. She pointed a small finger at the towering columns. "It is a nice house," Emily said. "It has a pool and a big kitchen, but my daddy says you should never claim things that are not yours. It is like stealing toys in the sandbox." She looked at me, her dark eyes full of innocent conviction. "Mark and the lady in the white dress they are playing pretend," Emily whispered, as if sharing a ghost story. "This house does not belong to them. My daddy let them borrow it, but they forgot to say thank you, and they forgot to give it back." The revelation hit me with the force of a train. The house, the symbol of Sarah's triumph, the stage for my humiliation. It wasn't theirs. It never was. I looked at Arthur, my mouth slightly open. "You own it," I whispered. "I own the holding company that owns the deed." Arthur corrected me, his voice calm and terrifying. "Mark was an employee of a subsidiary I acquired last year. He asked to stay in the property as a caretaker while we prepared it for auction. He begged for a favor. He said his wife was pregnant, and they needed a temporary place while their own home was being renovated." Arthur's eyes narrowed as he looked at the champagne tower visible through the French doors. "I did not know," Arthur continued, "that he had moved in, changed the locks, and started hosting galas claiming he bought the place cash. I also did not know he was using the property title, which he forged, to secure loans from private lenders." I felt a wave of dizziness. It was worse than I thought. It wasn't just debt. It was fraud. Criminal fraud. "He is going to prison," I said. It was a statement of fact. "That is the likely outcome," Arthur agreed. "I have the papers in my car. The police are on their way to enforce the eviction and the arrest warrant. I came in through the back gate to ensure the perimeter was secure before they arrived." He looked at me, his expression softening slightly. "I am sorry. Linda," he said. "This is going to be ugly, and it is going to happen in about 10 minutes. I looked at the house. I could see Sarah laughing, holding a piece of cake. I could see my parents beaming with pride. I could see the guests drinking the wine that Mark had bought with stolen money. They had laughed at me. They had called me pitiful. They had offered me a security guard as a consolation prize for my failed life, and all the while, they were standing on a trapdoor that Arthur Vance was about to open. A strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't panic. It wasn't pity. It was anticipation. I looked at Arthur Vance, a man who had come to destroy my sister's life, and I realized I did not want to stop him. "Mr. Vance," I said, my voice steady and clear. "Arthur," he corrected. "Arthur," I said. "You said the police are 10 minutes away?" "Yes." "And you are going in there to serve the papers?" "I am." I smoothed the front of my gray suit. I checked my reflection in the dark water of the fountain basin. I looked like exactly what I was, a professional, a woman of substance. "Do you need a witness?" I asked. Arthur looked at me. A slow smile spread across his face, revealing a predatory intelligence that matched my own. "I might," he said. "Are you offering?" "I am not just offering," I said, stepping closer to him and Emily. "I am insisting. I want to be there when the curtain falls." Emily jumped off the fountain rim and grabbed my hand. Her small hand was warm in mine. "Can we go watch the idiots now?" she asked. Arthur chuckled and offered his other hand to his daughter. "Yes, Emily," he said. "We can go watch." He looked at me, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was standing next to an equal. "After you, Linda," Arthur said. I took a deep breath of the cool garden air. I turned toward the house. "Let's go," I said, and together, the three of us, the billionaire, the accountant, and the child, began our walk toward the glass doors, ready to bring the whole rotten structure crashing down. The name Arthur Vance did not just ring a bell, it set off a siren in the archive of my professional memory as a forensic accountant. I categorized people into 3 distinct columns: the victims, the criminals, and the predators. Arthur Vance was none of those. He was the ecosystem itself. He was the weather system that determined whether smaller entities lived or died. Vance Capital was not just a private equity firm, it was a leviathan on Wall Street. I had studied his acquisition of the faltering Tech Onyx conglomerate 2 years ago. It was a masterclass in aggressive restructuring. He had stripped the company of its dead weight, fired the incompetent board, and turned a $1 billion loss into a $3 billion profit in 18 months. He was known in the industry as the surgeon because he cut deep, but the patient usually survived, if they were worth saving. I looked at him, really looked at him, and the data points realigned. The bespoke suit made sense. The quiet confidence made sense. The terrified look on Mark's face when he saw the investors made perfect sense. Mark was not just in debt to a bank, he had stolen from a Shark Tank. "Vance Capital," I said, my voice steady, though my pulse had quickened. "You specialize in distressed asset acquisition and leveraged buyouts. Your firm manages over $40 billion in assets." Arthur tilted his head, a spark of genuine surprise lighting up his dark eyes. "42 billion as of the closing bell yesterday," he corrected softly. "But who is counting?" He studied me then, his eyes narrowing slightly as he processed my face, my name, and my demeanor. I saw the gears turning behind his gaze. He was doing exactly what I had just done, running a background check in his mind. "Linda Stratton," he murmured, testing the syllables. Then, his eyebrows lifted. "Stratton, the auditor from the Solstice investigation?" I nodded once. I was the lead forensic analyst on that file. "The Solstice case," Arthur said, a tone of reverence entering his voice. "That was masterful. You are the one who found the ghost employees in the payroll ledger. You unraveled a 5-year embezzlement scheme buried in 4,000 pages of boring tax documents. The press called you the Ice Queen because you interrogated the CEO for 6 hours without blinking." "He was lying," I said simply. "I do not blink when people lie. It distracts from the math." A slow, appreciative smile spread across Arthur's face. It was not the polite smile of a party guest. It was the smile of a general recognizing a fellow strategist on the battlefield. The dynamic between us shifted instantly. We were no longer two strangers in a garden. We were colleagues standing over a crime scene. "The Ice Queen," Arthur repeated, but this time it sounded like a compliment. "I read your report on that case. It was brilliant, concise, ruthless. I told my CFO that whoever wrote that report was wasted at a mid-tier firm. I like my firm," I said defensively, though the praise from a man of his stature warmed a cold place in my chest. "It allows me autonomy. It allows you to be underpaid and undervalued. If today is any indication," Arthur countered, gesturing vaguely toward the house where my family was currently laughing at my expense. "But we can discuss your career trajectory later. Right now, we have a mutual acquaintance to discuss." "Mark," I said. "Mark," Arthur agreed. His face hardened, the warmth vanishing instantly. "Mark is not an investor. Linda, Mark was a mid-level procurement manager at one of my construction subsidiaries, Vance Build. He was responsible for sourcing materials for luxury condo developments." I closed my eyes for a second, the pieces falling into place with a sickening click. Procurement, the easiest place to hide theft if you are careful. "Phantom vendors?" I asked. "Classic," Arthur nodded. "He set up shell companies, Apex Concrete, Summit Steel. They billed us for materials that were never delivered. He approved the invoices himself, small amounts at first, 5,000 here, 10,000 there, just enough to fly under the radar of the automated flags. But then he got greedy," I surmised. "The wedding, the lifestyle, Sarah?" "Precisely," Arthur said. 6 months ago, the invoices spiked. He started billing for entire shipments of marble and exotic lumber. We are talking about $300,000 a month. In total, your brother-in-law has siphoned approximately $3.2 million from my company accounts. $3 million. I felt a wave of nausea. Not for Mark, but for the sheer stupidity of it. $3 million was a lot of money to spend on champagne towers and rented Bentleys, but it was a pittance to steal from a man like Arthur Vance. It was suicide. "And the house?" I asked, looking up at the towering white columns. "Emily said he borrowed it." Arthur let out a dry, humorless laugh. "This estate is asset number 409 in my holding company's portfolio." Arthur explained. "It was seized from a previous debtor last year. It is currently in a trust, waiting for a court-ordered auction next month. Mark had access to the keys because he was supposed to be supervising the maintenance crew, cutting the grass, checking the pipes. He was the caretaker. Linda. Nothing more." He moved in, I whispered, horrified. He moved in, Arthur confirmed. He told the neighbors he bought it. He told your sister he bought it. He even forged a deed to show his investors to get more cash loans. He has been living in my property, drinking my wine cellar dry, and throwing parties on my lawn while I was in Tokyo closing a merger. And Sarah? I asked. Does she know? I needed to know. It was crucial. If Sarah was a co-conspirator, if she knew she was living on stolen ground, then she deserved everything that was coming. But if she was just blind... Arthur looked at me, his expression softening slightly as he glanced down at Emily, who was busy tying knots in long blades of grass. My investigators have been watching them for 3 weeks, Arthur said. We have tapped the phones, we have read the emails. As far as we can tell, your sister is completely oblivious. She believes Mark is a genius. She thinks the money comes from his brilliant real estate deals. She is not a criminal, Linda. She is just willfully ignorant. She sees what she wants to see. She sees the gold plating, I said, remembering the stroller. She never checks to see if the metal underneath is rusting. Exactly, Arthur said, but ignorance is not a legal defense against eviction. He reached into his inside jacket pocket and pulled out a thick, folded document. It was stamped with the seal of the New York State Supreme Court. This is an emergency eviction order and a civil seizure notice, Arthur said, tapping the paper against his palm. And the police are bringing the arrest warrant for the embezzlement and fraud charges. I intend to walk in there, hand this to Mark, and give every single person on this property exactly 60 minutes to vacate the premises before the locks are changed. It was a nuclear option. It was total annihilation. I looked at the house again. I could imagine the scene inside. Sarah on her throne, my mother laughing, the guests sipping stolen wine. They were celebrating a mirage, and the wind was about to blow it away. I should have felt bad. I should have felt a protective instinct toward my sister. The pregnant woman who was about to be homeless. I should have wanted to shield my parents from the shame of their golden child's downfall. But I remembered the laughter. I remembered Sarah's voice on the microphone. Mark can set you up with a security guard. I remembered my mother's face, twisted with amusement at my humiliation. They had not protected me. They had not spared my feelings. They had turned my life into a joke to entertain strangers. Arthur, I said. He looked at me. Yes? I want to go with you. He paused. You do not have to. Linda, this is going to be brutal. You can walk to your car, drive away, and read about it in the papers tomorrow. You can keep your hands clean. My hands have been clean for 36 years, I said, my voice dropping to a low, intense register. I have played by the rules. I have been the good daughter. I have been the quiet sister. And all it got me was a seat in the back of the room and a lecture on why I am inadequate. I took a step closer to him. I do not want to read about it, I said. I want to see it. I want to see Mark's face when he realizes the math has finally caught up with him. I want to see Sarah realize that her diamond is glass. I want to watch the audit happen. Arthur studied me for a long moment. Then, the corner of his mouth lifted. You are vindictive, he observed. I like that in an accountant. It shows passion. He extended his elbow, offering me his arm. It was a courtly, old-world gesture that felt jarringly appropriate for the execution we were about to perform. Shall we? He asked, before I could take his arm. A small hand slipped into mine. I looked down. Emily was standing there, brushing grass stains off her blue dress. She looked up at me with those fierce, intelligent eyes. I want to hold Linda's hand, Emily declared. Arthur looked at his daughter, then at me. Well, it seems we are a united front. A family, Emily said. The word hung in the air. A family. We were a strange tableau. A billionaire executioner, a forensic accountant scorned by her kin, and a 6-year-old girl who saw through everyone's lies. We were not related by blood. We were bonded by something stronger. The truth. We were the reality check that was about to crash the fantasy party. I squeezed Emily's hand. It felt solid, real. Yes, I said to the little girl. For the next hour, we are the only family that matters. I looked at Arthur. He nodded. Let's go disturb the peace. Arthur said. We began to walk. We moved across the overgrown lawn, past the dry fountain, and up the stone steps to the terrace. The music inside was loud, a generic pop song about living forever. The irony was palpable. As we approached the glass doors, I caught my reflection in the pane. I did not look like the downtrodden woman who had fled the room 10 minutes ago. I stood tall. My gray suit looked sharp, armored, flanked by Arthur Vance and his daughter. I looked powerful. I was no longer the guest. I was the auditor. And the books were about to be closed. Arthur reached for the handle of the sliding door. He looked at me one last time. Ready? He asked. Open it, I said. He slid the door open. The noise of the party rushed out to meet us. But we walked straight into it, 3 shadows stepping into the blinding light of the chandelier, bringing with us the one thing this party could not survive: reality. The sliding glass door moved on its track with a low, heavy rumble that sounded like distant thunder. I stepped across the threshold first, with Emily's small, warm hand firmly gripping my left hand, and Arthur Vance moving like a dark storm front on my right. The late afternoon sun was positioning itself perfectly behind us. It flooded through the open glass, casting 3 long, sharp shadows that stretched across the expanse of the white marble floor, cutting through the crowd like a knife. We were silhouettes against the blinding light of the garden: a woman in gray armor, a titan of industry, and a child who held the keys to the truth. The effect was instantaneous and cinematic. The party had been a cacophony of noise: the clinking of crystal, the roar of performative laughter, the thumping bass of a pop song, and the high-pitched chatter of people trying to outdo one another. But as we stepped into the room, the noise did not just fade. It was severed. The DJ, sensing the sudden shift in atmospheric pressure, cut the music. The silence that followed was heavy, thick, and suffocating. It started near the door and rippled outward in a wave. Guests turned, their champagne flutes arrested halfway to their mouths, their smiles freezing and then dissolving into confusion. They were looking at us. They saw me, Linda the invisible sister, standing tall with a strange calm that they had never seen before. They saw the little girl in the bespoke blue silk dress, and most importantly, they saw the man. Arthur Vance did not need an introduction. Even to those who did not know his face from the financial pages, his presence was undeniable. He stood there, motionless, his hands relaxed at his sides, radiating a kind of dangerous gravity that sucked the air out of the room. He was not looking at the guests. He was looking at the room itself, his eyes sweeping over the floral arrangements and the rented furniture with the detached, critical gaze of an owner inspecting a property that had been vandalized. I scanned the room, my eyes locking onto the one person who understood exactly what was happening: Mark. My brother-in-law was standing near the white grand piano, a glass of expensive red wine in his hand. He had been in the middle of a boast, his mouth open, a smile plastered on his face. But as his eyes landed on Arthur, the smile did not just fade, it vanished as if it had been wiped off with a rag. The color drained from his face so fast it was frightening. He went from a healthy, flushed pink to a sickly, translucent gray in the span of a single heartbeat. His eyes bulged. His jaw went slack. It was the face of a man who was watching his own executioner walk through the door. He tried to speak, perhaps to stammer out an excuse or a greeting. But his motor functions failed him. His fingers went numb. The crystal wine glass slipped from his hand. It seemed to fall in slow motion. I watched it tumble, turning end over end, catching the light one last time before it hit the pristine white Persian rug that Sarah had bragged cost $12,000. Crash. The sound of the shattering crystal was shockingly loud in the silent room. The red wine exploded outward, a violent crimson splash that stained the white wool like a gunshot wound. The dark liquid seeped into the fibers, spreading rapidly, an ugly, indelible blemish on the perfect white canvas of Sarah's fantasy. Mark stared at the stain, paralyzed. He did not move to clean it up. He did not apologize. He just shook. A visible tremor started in his hands and traveled up his arms until his entire body was vibrating with terror. The sound of the breaking glass broke the spell for everyone else, but not in the way Mark would have hoped. "Oh, for heaven's sake!" The voice was shrill and annoyed. "Sarah." My sister pushed her way through the crowd of stunned guests, her sequined maternity gown rustling aggressively. She did not look at Mark. She did not look at the wine stain. She looked at me. She marched toward us, her face twisted into a mask of indignation. She stopped 5 feet away, placing her hands on her hips, her diamond ring flashing in the sunlight. She looked at Arthur with a sneer, completely failing to recognize the quality of his suit or the danger in his eyes. To her, he was just a stranger crashing her moment. "Linda!" Sarah barked, her voice echoing in the silent hall. "What on earth are you doing? I told you to go get some air, not to go out and drag in strays from the street." The crowd gasped. I heard a few nervous titters, but they died down quickly. The tension in the room was too high for laughter. Sarah gestured dismissively at Arthur and Emily. "Who are these people?" she demanded, looking me up and down with disgust. "This is a private event, Linda. It is exclusive. We have a guest list for a reason. You cannot just bring whoever this is into my home. This is not a soup kitchen or a charity ward." She looked at Arthur, her nose wrinkling as if he smelled bad. "And you?" she snapped at him. "I do not know who you are, but you are trespassing. If you are looking for a handout or a job, you are in the wrong neighborhood. My husband only hires professionals, not people who wander in from the woods." The irony was so rich I could taste it. She was standing in his house, drinking his wine, insulting him to his face, and calling him a beggar. Arthur did not blink. He did not speak. He simply looked at her. It was a look of profound, almost anthropological curiosity. He was observing a species of arrogance he had clearly never encountered in the wild before. I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my chest. Not hysterical laughter, but the cold, sharp laughter of victory. I stepped forward, shielding Emily slightly with my body, though the little girl looked far from frightened. "Hello, Sarah," I said. My voice was calm, devoid of the apology that usually colored my tone when I spoke to her. It was the voice I used when I presented a finding of fraud to a board of directors. "I did not bring you astray," I continued, a small, razor-sharp smile cutting across my face. "I brought you a gift. In fact, considering what is about to happen, I would say I brought you the most significant gift of the day." "Gift?" Sarah scoffed, rolling her eyes. "What, did you find a gardener and his kid to help clean up?" "I do not need your help. Linda, I have staff for that. Get them out of here. You are embarrassing me. You are embarrassing the family." "I do not think I am the one who should be embarrassed." "Sarah," I said softly. Mark finally found the strength to move. He lurched forward from the piano, stumbling slightly as if his legs were made of rubber. "Sarah," he croaked. His voice was a dry rasp. "Sarah, stop, please." Sarah whipped around to look at her husband. "Mark, tell them. Tell Linda to get these people out of our house. Look, he even brought a child. Who brings a child to a formal event uninvited? It is tacky." Mark did not answer her. He was staring at Arthur, his eyes pleading, begging for a mercy that he knew he did not deserve. Arthur ignored Mark completely. He took a slow step forward, his shoes clicking on the marble. The sound was deliberate, rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock counting down. He looked around the room again, his gaze lingering on the oil paintings hanging on the walls, the sculptures on the pedestals, the antique vases on the mantel. He was taking inventory. The guests were shifting uncomfortably. They were sensing that something was wrong. The air was charged with static. Why was the host so terrified? Why was the intruder so calm? Why was Linda, the mouse, smiling like a cat? Then, the silence was broken by the clear, bell-like voice of a child. Emily stepped out from behind me. She raised her small arm and pointed a finger directly at a large, abstract oil painting hanging above the fireplace. It was a swirling composition of blues and grays. "Daddy," Emily said, her voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the room. "That is Mommy's painting, the one she bought in Paris." The crowd froze. Emily turned her head, looking directly at Sarah with innocent confusion. "Why did that lady say her husband bought it?" Emily asked, her voice loud and inquisitive. "She told everyone Mark bought it for her birthday, but that is not true. It belongs to us. It has been in our house since I was a baby." The words hung in the air like smoke. "It belongs to us. Our house." A murmur started in the center of the room. It was low at first, like the buzzing of bees, but it spread rapidly. People were leaning in to whisper to one another. "Did you hear that? What did the child say? Their house? I thought Mark built this place. Who is that man? He looks familiar. Wait, isn't that Arthur Vance?" "Vance? The billionaire?" Sarah's face flushed a deep, ugly red. She looked from Emily to the painting, then back to Mark. "What is she talking about?" Sarah hissed, her voice rising in panic. "Mark, tell this brat to shut up. Tell her you bought that painting at the gallery in Soho. I saw the receipt." Mark said nothing. He was gripping the edge of the piano as if it were the only thing keeping him upright. He was sweating profusely now, heavy drops rolling down his pale face. "Mark!" Sarah screamed, stamping her foot. Suddenly, there was a commotion near the buffet table. My parents, who had been momentarily stunned into silence, had recovered their wits. They saw their golden girl being attacked, their perfect afternoon being ruined, and their protective instincts kicked in. My mother, Carol, charged forward, her face twisted in fury. My father, Robert, followed close behind, his face red with exertion. "Linda!" my mother shrieked as she closed the distance. "Have you lost your mind? How dare you? How dare you bring these liars in here to ruin your sister's big day?" She reached me, raising her hand as if to grab my arm or perhaps slap me. She was vibrating with the self-righteous anger of a woman who believes she is defending royalty against a peasant uprising. "You are jealous," my mother spat, her eyes wild. "You have always been jealous. You cannot stand to see Sarah happy, so you hire these actors to come in here and make a scene? A fake painting? Really? That is the best you could come up with? Get out. Get out right now before I call the police." "I would not do that if I were you." "Carol," I said calmly. "Do not tell me what to do," she yelled. "You are a disgrace. Mark, call security. Throw them out." My father stepped up next to her, puffing out his chest to intimidate Arthur. "Now see here," my father blustered, pointing a finger at Arthur's chest. "I do not know who you think you are, buddy, but you are upsetting my daughter. This is private property. You are trespassing. Now take your kid and your nonsense and get the hell off my son-in-law's estate before I make you regret it." My father's finger was inches from Arthur's lapel. Arthur shifted. He did not raise his voice. He did not raise his hand. He simply turned his head and looked at my father. It was a look of such immense, crushing authority that my father physically recoiled. It was the look of a lion being barked at by a chihuahua. It was the look of a man who commanded armies of lawyers and controlled the fates of corporations. Arthur took one step toward my parents. Just one. The effect was palpable. My father stumbled back, nearly tripping over his own feet. My mother's mouth snapped shut, the insults dying in her throat. "I suggest," Arthur said, his voice low, smooth, and terrifyingly polite, "that you lower your voice. You are currently shouting at the owner of this house, in the presence of his daughter, while standing on a floor that your son-in-law has ruined with my wine." He paused, letting the words sink in. "And as for the police," Arthur continued, his eyes sliding over to Mark, who was now weeping silently, You do not need to call them. They are already at the gate, but they are not here for me." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a tomb. The murmuring in the crowd stopped completely. Every eye was fixed on the three of us. The dynamic had shifted irrevocably. Sarah was no longer the queen on her throne. Mark was no longer the successful tycoon. My parents were no longer the proud patriarch and matriarch. They were suspects, and I stood there, watching the color drain from my mother's face as the reality of Arthur's words began to penetrate her shield of denial. I felt a sense of lightness, a lifting of a burden I had carried for decades. The play was over, the house lights were coming on, and the monsters were finally being revealed as nothing more than small, frightened people in borrowed costumes. The silence in the room was not peaceful. It was heavy, pressurized, and volatile. It was the silence of a courtroom right before the foreman reads the verdict. My parents had retreated a step, cowed by the sheer gravitational force of Arthur Vance's presence, but their confusion was still palpable. They were waiting for a punchline. They were waiting for someone to tell them this was a misunderstanding, a bad joke, or a mix-up. But Arthur did not deal in misunderstandings. He dealt in absolute, verifiable facts. He moved away from my parents and walked directly toward Mark. He did not rush. His stride was measured, eating up the distance between the door and the piano with a terrifying inevitability. He did not extend a hand in greeting. He did not smile. He simply reached into the inner breast pocket of his jacket and withdrew a thick brown manila envelope. It was packed tight with documents. I could see the edges of the papers straining against the clasp. Arthur stopped directly in front of my brother-in-law. Mark was still trembling. His eyes locked on the envelope as if it were a loaded gun. "Mark," Arthur said. His voice was not loud. He did not shout. In fact, he spoke with a calm, conversational volume. Yet the acoustics of the room seemed to carry his words to every corner. It was a voice that commanded attention without begging for it. "You have not returned 15 calls from my legal counsel in the last 48 hours, Arthur stated. "You have ignored 3 certified letters sent to this address. You have blocked the number of my chief financial officer." Arthur held the envelope out. He did not hand it to Mark. He pressed it against Mark's chest. Mark's hands came up automatically, reflexively, to clutch it, as if he were catching a falling object. "I am a busy man. Mark," Arthur continued, his tone hardening into something cold and jagged. "I do not make house calls, but when an employee steals from me and then throws a party on the scene of the crime, I find myself compelled to make an exception." "I can explain," Mark stammered. His voice was wet, pathetic. "Mr. Vance, please, not here. Can we go to the study? Please, just 5 minutes." "There is no study," Arthur said. "There is only my office, which you are currently occupying illegally." "What is going on?" The scream tore through the tension. Sarah had recovered from her initial shock and decided that the best defense was a high-decibel offense. She marched over to Mark, grabbing his arm and trying to pull him away from Arthur. "Mark, why are you letting him talk to you like that?" Sarah shrieked. She turned her fury on Arthur. "Who do you think you are? You barge in here. You insult my parents. You harass my husband. Where is security? I want this man removed. I want him arrested." She looked around wildly, waving her hand at the confused waiters. "Someone call the police," she yelled. "Get this lunatic out of my house." Mark moved then. For the first time in their marriage, he did not cower. He acted out of pure survival instinct. He grabbed Sarah's wrist, hard. "Sarah, stop," Mark hissed, his voice trembling with panic. "Shut up! Just shut up!" Sarah froze. She looked down at Mark's hand gripping her wrist, then up at his face. She had never seen him look like this. He wasn't looking at her with adoration. He was looking at her with terror. "Mark?" she whispered, her voice wavering. "You are hurting me. Why are you?" "He cannot call security. Sarah." I said. I stepped forward. The sound of my heels on the marble was distinct. I walked until I was standing right next to Arthur, forming a unified front. I looked at my sister. then at the crowd of gawking guests. "He cannot call security," I repeated, projecting my voice so it reached the back of the room. "Because he did not pay them. Just like he did not pay the caterers. Just like he did not pay the florists." "Linda, stay out of this," my mother shouted from the sidelines. "You are just trying to stir up trouble because you are jealous." "No, Mother," I said, turning to face her briefly. "I am trying to clarify the liability." I turned back to the room. I took a breath. Centering myself, this was it. This was the audit. "Allow me to make the introductions that my brother-in-law is too afraid to make," I said. I gestured to the man beside me. "This," I said, pointing a steady hand at Arthur, "is Mr. Arthur Vance. He is the CEO of Vance Capital. He is a billionaire, and more importantly for everyone standing here drinking his wine, he is the sole legal owner of this estate." A gasp went through the room. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. I saw heads turn toward the windows, looking at the grounds with new eyes. "And Mark?" I continued, turning my gaze to my brother-in-law. "Mark is not a real estate investor. Mark is a former procurement manager for a subsidiary of Vance Capital, and as of this morning, he is also a defendant." Sarah dropped Mark's arm. She took a step back, her hands shaking. "That is a lie," she breathed. "Mark closed a $10 million deal this week. He told me. He showed me the wire transfer." "He showed you a Photoshop edit," I said ruthlessly. "There was no deal. Sarah, there never was. The only transaction Mark has made in the last 6 months is a systematic embezzlement of company funds." I looked at Arthur. He gave me a barely perceptible nod, granting me permission to reveal the number. "Mark owes Mr. Vance's company exactly $3,200,000, I announced. The number hung in the air. $3,200,000. It was a specific, damning figure. It wasn't a round number like a few million. It was an accounting figure. It implied a paper trail. It implied evidence. "No," Sarah whimpered. She looked at Mark. "Mark, tell her she is lying. Tell her." Mark did not speak. He was clutching the brown envelope to his chest, staring at the floor. His silence was a confession louder than any scream. The guests began to back away. The circle around Mark and Sarah widened. It was a primal reaction. Nobody wanted to be standing next to the contagion when the quarantine finally came down. But I was not done. I had one more item on the ledger to reconcile. One more lie that needed to be exposed to fully liberate my sister from her delusion, or destroy her with it. I looked at Sarah's left hand. The diamond ring was flashing under the chandelier lights. "And Sarah," I said, my voice softening deceptively, "there is one more thing." Sarah looked at me. Her eyes filled with tears and hatred. "What? What else do you want to take from me?" "I do not want to take anything," I said. "I just want you to know the value of what you are holding." I pointed to her ring. "That ring," I said. "You have been flashing it in my face for 7 months. You told me it was a 2-carat. VVS1 clarity, D color diamond. You told me it cost $40,000. "It did?" Sarah cried, clutching her hand to her chest. "Mark bought it at Tiffany's." "No," I said. "He didn't." I took a step closer to her. "When I arrived today," I said, "I saw a folder on the console table in the hallway. It was mixed in with the party planning papers. It was a certification from a laboratory I have never heard of. So, being who I am, I looked it up on my phone while I was waiting for my water." I paused for effect. "It is a moissanite core with a cubic zirconia overlay," I said. "It is a synthetic composite. I checked the serial number on the certificate. It retails on Amazon for $189. The silence that followed was absolute. $189. For a woman like Sarah, who measured her self-worth in zeros. This was a fate worse than bankruptcy. It was cheap. It was common. Sarah looked down at the ring. She looked at it as if it had suddenly turned into a spider. "Mark?" she whispered. She looked at her husband. "Mark, Tell me she is lying. Tell me this is real. Mark finally broke. The pressure was too much. The envelope, the billionaire, the sister-in-law who knew too much. It all crushed him at once. I had to, Mark wailed. He dropped to his knees, literally dropped. He hit the floor with a thud, clutching the envelope, tears streaming down his face. I had to. Sarah, he sobbed. I needed more time. The investors, I needed them to think I was successful. If I looked rich, they would give me money. I was going to pay it back. I swear. He looked up at Arthur, his face a mask of snot and tears. Mr. Vance, I was going to pay you back. I just needed to close one big deal. I used the money for the cars. The party was all marketing. It was an investment. You have to understand business. I understand business perfectly, Arthur said, his voice cutting through Mark's sobbing like a scalpel. What you are describing is not business. It is a Ponzi scheme. You stole my capital to fund a lifestyle you could not afford, in the hopes of defrauding new victims to pay off your old debts. Mark turned to Sarah, grabbing the hem of her dress. Sarah, I did it for us, he cried. I wanted you to be happy. You wanted the house. You wanted the ring. You said you wouldn't marry anybody. I had to be a somebody. Sarah recoiled. She kicked her leg out, shaking him off. Do not touch me, she screamed. You liar. You fraud. You made me look like a fool. She wasn't angry that he had stolen. She wasn't angry that he had hurt people. She was angry that she looked stupid. Even in the face of ruin, her narcissism remained intact. I watched them. My parents were standing by the buffet, frozen in horror. My mother was clutching her pearls, looking like she was about to faint. My father looked aged by 10 years in 10 minutes. Their perfect son-in-law was on his knees, confessing to a felony. Their perfect daughter was wearing a piece of glass on her finger. And me? The failure? I was standing on the right side of the law. Arthur checked his watch. He glanced at the dial, then looked back at Mark. You have wasted enough of my time, Arthur said. He stepped over the puddle of red wine. The police are at the front gate, Arthur announced to the room. They are executing a search warrant and an arrest warrant. Mark, you are going into custody. He looked at Sarah, then at my parents. As for the rest of you, Arthur said, this is a seizure of assets. The house is being sealed. The cars in the driveway that are leased under the company name are being repossessed immediately. He raised his voice slightly, addressing the entire room of stunned guests. You have 60 minutes, Arthur said. 60 minutes to remove your personal effects. 60 minutes to get in your cars and leave my property. Whatever is left inside after 1 hour belongs to Vance Capital. Panic ensued. It wasn't a stampede, but it was close. The friends who had been drinking champagne 5 minutes ago suddenly remembered they had urgent appointments elsewhere. People started grabbing their purses, their coats. The 3 men in the corner, the debt collectors, moved toward Mark, but stopped when they saw Arthur. They knew better than to interfere with a shark of his size. They slipped out the back. Sarah stood alone in the center of the room. She looked at the ring on her finger. She tried to pull it off, but her fingers were swollen from the pregnancy. She tugged at it, frantic, desperate to get the symbol of her humiliation off her body. It won't come off, she shrieked, clawing at her hand. Get it off me! I felt a small squeeze on my hand. I looked down. Emily was still there. She hadn't let go. She had watched the whole thing with wide, solemn eyes. She wasn't scared. She looked proud. You were really brave, Emily whispered to me. I looked at the chaos around me. I looked at Mark sobbing on the floor. I looked at Sarah screaming at her finger. I looked at my parents, who were now arguing with each other in hushed, angry whispers. I wasn't brave, Emily, I said quietly, squeezing her hand back. I just did the math. Same thing, Emily said wisely. Arthur turned to me. The hard lines of his face softened just a fraction. Thank you, Linda, he said. Your assistance was invaluable. I told you, I said. looking at the wreckage of the party. I wanted to see the audit. Well, Arthur said, looking at Mark being hauled to his feet by the arriving police officers who had just entered the foyer. The books are closed. Now comes the liquidation. He gestured toward the door. Shall we step out? Arthur asked. I find the air in here has suddenly become quite toxic. Agreed, I said. I turned my back on my sister, on my parents, and on the life I had tried so hard to fit into. I walked out with the billionaire and the girl, leaving the fake diamonds and the real debts behind us. The disintegration of a dynasty does not happen in silence. It is loud. It is messy. It is the sound of 1,000 illusions shattering at once, each shard tinkling as it hits the cold, hard ground of reality. Sarah did not faint. That would have been too dignified. Instead, she collapsed onto the rented velvet throne she had occupied like a queen only moments ago. Her legs gave out, not from physical weakness, but from the crushing weight of her own vanity. She began to wail. It was a guttural, ugly sound that tore through the room. She was not crying for her husband, who was currently being handcuffed by 2 officers near the piano. She was not crying for her unborn child, who would now enter the world in the middle of a felony investigation. "My shower!" Sarah screamed, clutching her stomach. "My reputation! How could he do this to me? What will everyone think?" She looked around the room, her eyes wild, searching for sympathy from the people she had spent months impressing, but there was no sympathy to be found. The exodus had already begun. The transformation of the guests was immediate and brutal. 5 minutes ago, they had been sipping champagne and toasting to the Stratton legacy. Now, they were fleeing a crime scene. I watched as the friends Sarah bragged about, the wives of hedge fund managers, the social climbers, the influencers, scrambled for the exits. They did not say goodbye. They did not offer condolences. They simply ran. "I have to go. My nanny just texted," one woman muttered, grabbing her Hermes bag and practically sprinting toward the door, not making eye contact with anyone. "We cannot be seen here," a man in a linen suit hissed to his wife. "If the SEC gets involved, I do not want my name on the guest list. Move." They streamed out of the French doors and the main entrance like rats sensing water on the deck of a sinking ship. They left their half-eaten cake and their unfinished wine, desperate to dissociate themselves from the contagion of failure. However, not everyone was leaving. As the tide of fair-weather friends receded, the rocks underneath were revealed. The 3 men I had noticed earlier, the ones in the ill-fitting suits who had been drinking tap water, did not run. They advanced. These were the creditors, the sharks who swim in the deep, dark waters where bank loans do not reach. They saw Mark in cuffs, and they realized their window for collection was closing fast. "Hey!" one of them shouted. Pushing past a terrified waiter, he lunged toward Mark, ignoring the police officers. "You owe us $40,000. Stratton, you said you had the cash in the safe." "Back off," a police officer barked, stepping between the thug and Mark. "He is a liar," the man screamed, his face turning purple. "He took our money for a sure-thing investment. He said he was buying land in Florida. I want my money." "Get in line," another man shouted from the back of the room. "He owes the catering company $15,000. We are taking the silver." It was chaos. The veneer of civilization had stripped away completely. The room descended into a shouting match of grievances. Mark, pinned against the piano by the police, looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare. He was sobbing openly now, a pathetic, broken figure stripped of his arrogance. "I am sorry," Mark blubbered. "I just needed more time." My parents, who had been standing near the buffet table in stunned silence, finally snapped out of their paralysis. The reality of the situation hit them. But predictably, they did not look inward. They looked for a scapegoat. My mother, Carol, marched toward Mark. Her face was a mask of fury. She raised her expensive handbag and swung it, hitting Mark's shoulder as the police tried to drag him away. "You scoundrel!" my mother shrieked. "You lied to us. You told us you were a genius. You told us we were set for life." My father, Robert, was right behind her, his face gray and shaking. "I trusted you. Mark, I boasted about you at the club. You made me look like a fool." They were screaming at him, spitting their venom at the man they had treated like a son, better than a son, for years. I stepped into their path. "Stop it," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was hard enough to cut through their hysteria. My mother spun around to face me. "Linda, did you hear what he did? He is a criminal. He tricked us. You have to help us sue him. You know about these things." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the fear in her eyes, but underneath the fear was the same old entitlement. "I am not helping you sue anyone," I said coldly. "And stop acting like innocent victims. You are accomplices." "How dare you?" my father sputtered. "We are victims. He deceived us." "He deceived you because you wanted to be deceived," I countered. "You ignored every red flag because you liked the free dinners. You liked the rides in the Bentley. You liked telling your friends that your son-in-law was a tycoon. You fed his ego, and now you are shocked that the monster you fed has grown teeth?" "We are his family," my mother cried. "He had a duty to us." "And you had a duty to me," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "But 5 minutes ago, you were laughing while he mocked me. You were cheering him on while he called me a failure. You were perfectly happy to throw me under the bus as long as Mark was driving the bus." My mother opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. I had one more card to play. One more truth that I had uncovered in my investigation of Mark's finances. A truth so devastating I had almost hesitated to reveal it. Almost. "You are worried about your reputation," I said. "You should be worried about your survival." My father frowned. "What are you talking about?" "The investment fund," I said. "The family trust that Mark set up for you last year. The one where you deposited the proceeds from the sale of your house in Florida? The money meant for your retirement care?" The blood drained from my father's face. He grabbed my mother's arm to steady himself. "Yes," my father whispered. "The high-yield account. Mark said it was earning 20% interest a month. Guaranteed returns." I let out a short, bitter laugh. 20% a month, Dad. Even the best hedge funds in the world struggle to make 20% a year. If someone offers you 20% a month, they are either selling drugs or running a Ponzi scheme. "Where is the money, Linda?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "Where is our $600,000? I looked over at Mark, who was now being led out the front door in cuffs. "Ask the Bellagio in Las Vegas," I said. "Or maybe the Wynn. Mark didn't invest a dime of it. He gambled it. He spent the last 6 months trying to win back the money he stole from Arthur Vance by playing high-stakes baccarat with your retirement fund." "No," my mother gasped. She brought her hand to her throat, her eyes rolling back slightly. "No, that is everything. That is all we have." "It is gone," I said brutally. "All of it. You are broke. In fact, you are worse than broke. You are destitute." My mother let out a strangled cry and slumped against my father. She began to hyperventilate, gasping for air in short, panic-stricken wheezes. My father looked as if he had been struck by lightning. He stared at the empty space where Mark had been standing, his mouth opening and closing wordlessly. The realization was setting in. No more country club. No more assisted living facility with ocean views. No more safety net. They had bet on the wrong horse. And the horse had just died on the track. Then, there was Sarah. My sister had stopped screaming. She sat on her throne, watching the police car lights flash through the window. The reality of her situation was finally piercing through her narcissism. The house was gone. The husband was gone. The money was gone. She looked at our parents, huddled together in terror. She looked at the empty room. Then, she looked at me. Her eyes changed. The sneer vanished. The arrogance evaporated. In their place appeared a look I had not seen on her face since we were children. A look of desperate, pathetic need. She stood up shakily and walked toward me. She wiped her tear-stained face with the back of her hand. "Linda," she said. Her voice was small, trembling. "Linda, wait." She reached out and grabbed my hand. Her grip was clammy. "You are an accountant," Sarah stammered, her eyes searching mine. "You are smart. You fix things. You can fix this, right? You can talk to that man. Mr. Vance? Tell him it was a mistake. Tell him I didn't know. I cannot fix a felony." "Sarah," I said, pulling my hand away. "But the money," Sarah pleaded, stepping closer. Mom said you have money. She said you are a miser. You have savings, right? You have a retirement fund?" I stared at her. Even now, in the depths of her ruin, she was calculating my net worth. "I do," I said. "I have quite a bit." Hope flared in Sarah's eyes. It was disgusting to watch. "Oh, thank God," she breathed. Okay. So we can fix this. You can bail Mark out, or if he goes to jail. You can help me. I have the baby coming. Linda, I cannot be homeless. You can buy a house for us. A smaller one. That is fine. Just something nice. We are sisters. Linda, blood is thicker than water, right?" She tried to smile. It was a grotesque imitation of affection. "You need to help me," Sarah insisted, her voice gaining a little strength. "You are the big sister. It is your job. You have all that money sitting there doing nothing. You do not have kids. You do not have a husband. What do you need it for? I have a family to support." I felt a cold rage settle in my gut. It was heavy and solid, like a stone. "You are right," I said slowly. "I do not have a husband, and I do not have children." Sarah nodded eagerly. "Exactly. So you can help. It is the right thing to do." I took a step toward her, invading her personal space. "I do not have those things," I said, my voice as hard as diamond. "Because I spent the last 15 years working 80 hours a week while you were going to parties. I drove a 10-year-old Toyota while you leased Range Rovers. I cooked my own meals while you ate at Nobu. I saved every dollar because I knew that one day the world would come for me, and I wanted to be ready." "Linda, please," Sarah whimpered. "My money is not a lottery win. Sarah," I continued, "it is my life, it is my time, it is my sweat, and you think you are entitled to it? You think that because you failed to plan, I am obligated to sacrifice my security to fund your delusion?" "But the baby," Sarah cried, using her final shield. "You would let your niece starve?" "The baby will not starve," I said. "There are government programs. There are shelters. There is the real world. Sarah, welcome to it. Millions of women raise children without millions of dollars. You are about to learn how to be one of them." "You are a monster," Sarah screamed, her face twisting back into hatred. "You are selfish. You are hoarding money while your family suffers. I hope you die alone with your cash." "I would rather die alone with my cash," I said calmly, "than live surrounded by people who only love me for it." I turned away from her. The bridge was not just burned. I had nuked the foundations. Arthur Vance stepped back into the room from the foyer. He had been giving instructions to the police, but now he signaled to the doorway. 4 men in dark suits entered. These were not the fake security guards Mark had hired. These were professionals. They moved with military precision. "Secure the perimeter," Arthur ordered. "No one leaves with anything other than the clothes on their backs and a purse or wallet. Check the bags. Mark Stratton purchased a lot of jewelry and electronics with stolen funds. Those are company assets." "Yes, sir," the lead bodyguard said. Sarah gasped. "You cannot search me. This is my house." "It is my house," Arthur corrected her, his voice brooking no argument. "And my security team will ensure that my property remains in my house. If you try to remove so much as a silver spoon, I will have you charged with theft to add to your husband's indictment." My mother was sobbing into my father's shoulder. Sarah was screaming at a bodyguard who was politely asking for her handbag. The room was a cacophony of misery. I stood in the center of it all, feeling a strange sense of peace. It was over. The lies were dead. Arthur walked over to me. He looked at the chaos, then at me. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I am," I said, and I meant it. "I think I'm finally free." "The moving trucks will be here in an hour to clear the furniture," Arthur said. "I suggest we leave before the crying gets any louder." "Yes," I said. "Let's go." I didn't look back at my parents. I didn't look back at Sarah. They were busy reaping the harvest they had sown. I walked out the front door, past the police cars, past the repossessed luxury sedans, and toward the only thing in the driveway that was fully paid for and honestly earned, my gray Toyota. But as I reached for my keys, I felt a hand on my arm. It was Arthur. "Wait," he said. The arrival of the Economic Crimes Unit changed the texture of the air. If the uniformed officers had brought order, these detectives brought finality. They did not run. They did not shout. They moved with the terrifying bureaucratic efficiency of the state coming to collect a debt that could not be paid with money. I stood on the driveway, the gravel crunching softly under my heels, and watched the dismantle of my brother-in-law. Mark was no longer the swaggering host. He was a piece of evidence. One of the detectives, a woman with a sharp face and a binder full of indictments, stepped forward to intercept the uniformed officers who were guiding Mark toward the cruiser. She stopped them. She spoke a few words that I could not hear, but the result was unmistakable. They removed the standard handcuffs and replaced them with heavy-duty restraints, securing his hands behind his back and checking the fit with professional indifference. Then, she began to read. I could see her lips moving, reciting the Miranda rights, but she was also listing the charges: wire fraud, embezzlement, aggravated identity theft, grand larceny. Mark sagged against the side of the police car. He looked small. The bravado that had fueled him for years, the ego that had allowed him to look down on me and call me a failure, had evaporated. He was just a man in a ruined suit, about to lose 20 years of his life. "No, you cannot take him." The scream came from behind me. Sarah. My sister rushed past me, her heavy maternity dress tangling around her legs. She threw herself at the police car, clawing at the window as they shoved Mark into the back seat. "He is my husband!" Sarah shrieked, banging on the glass. "He has a baby coming. You cannot do this. It is a misunderstanding." A female officer gently but firmly pulled Sarah back. "Ma'am, step away from the vehicle," the officer said. "You are interfering with a federal arrest." Sarah spun around, her eyes wild, panic finally overriding her vanity. She saw me standing there, watching the scene with my arms crossed over my chest. She saw the lack of surprise on my face. She saw the absolute, unwavering calm. She lunged at me. "Linda!" she cried, grabbing my arm with a desperate, painful grip. Her fingernails dug into the fabric of my suit. "Do something! You are standing there like a statue. Talk to them. Talk to Arthur. Tell them to stop." I looked down at her hand clutching my sleeve. It was the hand that wore the fake diamond, the hand that had pointed at me in mockery less than an hour ago. "I cannot stop the law, Sarah," I said. My voice was level, devoid of the pity she was begging for. "Mark stole $3 million. He did not borrow it. He stole it. This is the consequence." "But what about me?" Sarah wailed, shaking me. "What about me? I am innocent. I didn't know. Why am I being punished?" "You are not being punished," I said. "You are being corrected." "I have nothing," she screamed, the tears carving tracks through her expensive makeup. "They are taking the house. They are taking the cars. I have nowhere to go. You have to take me in. Linda, you have to—" "I am your sister." She tried to hug me, to leverage the physical bond of our shared blood to force me into submission. She wanted to transfer her weight onto me, just as she had always done. She wanted me to be the foundation so she could continue to be the decoration. I reached up and took her hands. For a second, hope flared in her eyes. She thought I was accepting the burden. I peeled her fingers off my arm. I did it slowly, deliberately, one finger at a time. I pushed her hands away from me, creating a physical gap between us that felt like a canyon. "No," I said. "No?" Sarah gasped, stumbling back. "What do you mean? No, you are family." "I was family when you needed a punching bag," I said, my voice sharp as broken glass. "I was family when you needed someone to look down on to feel tall. But I am not family now that you need a bank account." I looked her in the eye, channeling every ounce of the indifference she had shown me for a decade. "You laughed at me, Sarah," I said. "You stood on that stage and told everyone that my life was pathetic because I was unmarried. You mocked my freedom. You called it loneliness. You pitied me because I was not tied to a man." I gestured to the police car where Mark was sitting, his face pressed against the window, weeping. "Well," I said, "look at where your choices brought you. You wanted a provider? You got a felon. You wanted a status symbol? You got a handcuff. You laughed at my freedom. Sarah, now you can sit there and enjoy the chains you chose." Sarah stared at me, her mouth open, the shock of my refusal finally breaking through her denial. She realized, perhaps for the first time in her life, that I was not a resource. I was a person, and I was a person who had had enough. "You are heartless," she whispered. "I am just tired," I replied, "and I am done paying for your tickets to the show." I turned away from her. My parents were standing a few feet away, huddled together by the large stone planter. They looked like refugees from a shipwreck. My mother was clutching her chest, her face pale. My father was staring at his shoes, unable to meet my gaze. I walked over to them. I did not offer a hug. I did not offer comfort. I stood before them like a judge delivering a sentence. "Mom, Dad," I said. My mother looked up, her eyes swimming with tears. "Linda, we are ruined. The retirement fund is all gone." "I know," I said. "It is gone because you gave it to a con artist because he flattered you." "We are going to be on the street," my father choked out. "We have nothing left." "You will not be on the street," I said. Relief washed over their faces. They slumped slightly, thinking the safety net had deployed. They thought I was going to write a check, buy them a condo, and restore their comfortable, ungrateful lives. "I will find you a state-subsidized senior living facility," I said. "I will help you fill out the paperwork for Social Security and food assistance. I will make sure you have a roof over your heads and food on your plates." The relief vanished, replaced by horror. "State-subsidized?" my mother gasped. "You mean a home? For poor people?" "I mean a facility for people who have no money," I said bluntly, "which is what you are." "But you have millions," my mother cried, her voice rising in indignation. "You can buy us a house. You can restore our dignity." "Your dignity was lost the moment you joined in the laughter at my expense," I said. "I will keep you alive. I will ensure you do not starve or freeze. That is my duty as a daughter. But do not expect a single penny to maintain your vanity. No country clubs, no new cars, no vacations. Those days are over." "You cannot do this to us," my father said, his voice trembling with rage. "We are your parents." "And I am the child you ignored until you needed cash," I said. "I am offering you survival. If you want luxury, ask your golden child." I pointed at Sarah, who was sobbing into her hands. My parents looked at Sarah, then back at me. They realized the truth. The hierarchy had flipped. The world they understood, where Sarah was the prize and I was the utility, had been inverted. I did not wait for their answer. There was nothing more to say. I turned and walked toward the driveway where Arthur Vance was waiting. He was leaning against the side of a black Rolls-Royce that had pulled up silently during the commotion. His driver stood by the open door. But Arthur was watching me. He had witnessed the entire exchange. He had seen me sever the ties that bound me to this toxic dynamic. He did not look horrified. He looked impressed. I stopped in front of him. "That was thorough," Arthur said. "It was necessary," I replied. "I do not believe in carrying bad debt." Arthur nodded. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, rectangular card. It was not a standard business card. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with embossed black lettering. It was the kind of card you only gave to people who mattered. "Linda," he said, "I have a CFO who is currently very good at saying yes to me. He is competent, but he is agreeable, clearly. He missed the irregularities in the subsidiary accounts that allowed your brother-in-law to siphon off $3 million. He held the card out to me. "I do not need agreeable," Arthur said. "I need accurate. I need someone who can look at a balance sheet and see the story behind the numbers. I need someone who is not afraid to tell me, or anyone else, the brutal, unvarnished truth." I looked at the card. It had his direct line. It had a title printed below his name, but he was offering me a different one. "Vance Capital is looking for a new chief financial officer," Arthur said. "The base salary is $750,000 a year, plus stock options and performance bonuses. By my estimation, it is roughly double what you are currently making." I looked up at him. His eyes were dark and serious. There was no pity in them. This was not charity. This was not a man rescuing a damsel in distress. This was a headhunter acquiring top talent. "You saw how I handled my family," I said. "You know I can be cold." "Business is cold," Arthur replied. "Integrity is warm. You have both. I want you on my team. Linda, not because I feel sorry for you, but because I suspect you are the only person in this zip code who is actually as smart as I am." I smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that reached my eyes. I took the card. It felt substantial in my hand. "I will call you on Monday," I said. "I have some personal assets to liquidate first." "I look forward to it," Arthur said. Then, a small blue blur launched itself at me. Emily wrapped her arms around my waist, burying her face in my jacket. "You have to come," Emily said, her voice muffled by the wool of my suit. "My house has a swing set, a real one. My dad built it. It is not borrowed." I knelt down. Bringing myself to her eye level, I smoothed her dark hair back from her forehead. "I bet it is the best swing set in the world," I said. "It is," she said seriously. "And we have a dog. His name is Buster. He hates liars too." I laughed. "Then I'm sure Buster and I will get along just fine." "Promise you will come?" Emily asked, holding out her pinky finger. I hooked my pinky around hers. "I promise," I said. Arthur smiled at us, a rare soft expression that transformed his stern face. "We will see you soon, Linda," he said. He helped Emily into the back of the Rolls-Royce. He glanced at the house one last time, then at me. He nodded, a silent salute of respect, and got into the car. The heavy door closed with a solid, reassuring thud. The car pulled away, gliding down the driveway like a shark moving through deep water, leaving the chaos behind. I stood alone on the gravel. I looked back at the house. The front door was open. The police were carrying out boxes of evidence. The investors and fair-weather friends were gone. The music was dead. My parents were sitting on a garden bench near the fountain, looking old and defeated, and Sarah was sitting on the bottom step of the grand entrance. Her dress, the one she had spent thousands of dollars on, was smeared with dirt and red wine where she had brushed against the rug. She was surrounded by the debris of her party, the half-opened gifts, the discarded ribbons, the fake silver rattles. She looked like a broken doll thrown into a trash heap. She was staring at nothing, her hands resting on her stomach. Finally understanding that the show was over and the lights were never coming back on, I felt a ghost of sadness, but it passed quickly, like a cloud moving over the sun. I turned my back on them. I walked toward my gray Toyota. I had never been richer. I stopped with my hand hovering over the door handle of my gray Toyota. The engine was idling, a rhythmic, unpolished vibration that felt steady against my palm. I turned back to face Arthur Vance, who was standing by the open rear door of his pristine black Rolls-Royce. "Wait," Arthur repeated. He walked over to me, crossing the gravel driveway that separated his world of billionaires from my world of calculated frugality. He did not look like a man who had just evicted a family and destroyed a party. He looked energized. The destruction of the lie had seemingly invigorated him, or perhaps he was just excited to have found a ledger that finally balanced. "I am not a man who likes to leave business unfinished," Arthur said, stopping a few feet from me. The setting sun was casting long, dramatic shadows across the estate, turning the white columns of the mansion into gray bars. "And I am not a fan of waiting until Monday. Markets move too fast for that." "I am listening," I said, leaning against my car. "Dinner," Arthur proposed. "Tonight, there is a steakhouse in the city. Quiet, expensive, and discreet. We can draft the preliminary terms of your employment contract on a napkin if we have to. I want to lock this down before you realize you are overqualified and ask for more money." I looked at him. There was a glint in his eye that went beyond professional courtesy. It was admiration, for 36 years. Men had looked at me with indifference, looking past me to see my sister, or looking through me as if I were a piece of office furniture. But Arthur Vance was looking directly at me. He saw the steel in my spine. He saw the intellect that I had sharpened like a blade while everyone else was playing with balloons. "You want to discuss business on a Saturday night?" I asked, a small smile playing on my lips. "I thought you had a strict policy about work-life balance." "I have a strict policy against incompetence," Arthur corrected. "Finding competence is a rare event. It deserves to be celebrated with a dry-aged ribeye and a bottle of Cabernet that costs more than your brother-in-law's fake ring." It was a tempting offer. Not the steak, and certainly not the wine, but the company. To sit across from a mind that worked like mine. To speak the language of assets and liabilities without having to translate it for people who only understood greed. But before I answered, I looked back at the house one last time. The front door was still wide open. The police had finished their initial sweep and were preparing to seal the property. But the drama on the front steps had not ended. It had mutated. My parents and Sarah were no longer united in their grief. The shock had worn off, and the recriminations had begun. I could hear their voices carrying across the lawn, shrill and ugly in the twilight air. "It is your fault," Sarah was screaming, pointing a finger at our mother. "You told me he was a catch. You told me to marry him. You said he had potential." "I said he had money," my mother shrieked back, her face twisted with an ugliness that no amount of makeup could hide. "You were the one who had to have the big wedding. You drained him dry with your demands. If you had been a better wife, maybe he wouldn't have had to steal." "Don't you dare blame me," Sarah yelled, throwing a crumpled gift box at her own mother. "You just wanted his money for your nursing home. You are a leech. Both of you are leeches." "We raised you," my father bellowed, his face purple with rage. "We gave you everything. And this is how you repay us? By making us homeless? You are a selfish, spoiled brat." They were tearing each other apart. I watched them, fascinated. For years, I had fantasized about revenge. I had imagined scenes where I screamed at them, where I listed every hurt and every slight, forcing them to apologize. But looking at them now, I realized that would have been a waste of breath. They were not capable of remorse. They were only capable of hunger. And now that the host was dead, the parasites were turning on each other. I realized then that the sweetest revenge was not an act of violence. It was not a clever insult. It was simply removing myself from the equation. I was the only thing that could have saved them. I was the only one with the resources, the stability, and the conscience to pull them out of the pit they had dug. By walking away, I was not killing them. I was simply letting gravity take its course. They were a structure built on sand, and the tide had finally come in. I felt a profound sense of lightness, the invisible cord that had tethered me to their approval, to their needs, to their toxic definition of family. Snapped. It was gone. I was free. I turned back to Arthur. He had been watching them too, his expression one of mild distaste, like a man watching a reality television show that had gone on for too long. "So," Arthur said, turning his attention back to me. "Dinner? My driver can take us. We will leave your car here and have it towed to the city tomorrow." He gestured to the open door of the Rolls-Royce. The interior looked inviting: soft leather, climate control, a world of comfort where someone else navigated the bumps in the road. It was the passenger seat of a billionaire's life. It was a position many women, including my sister, would have killed for. I looked at the Rolls-Royce. Then I looked at my Toyota. It was 10 years old. The paint was chipping on the hood. The odometer read 140,000 miles. There was a coffee stain on the passenger seat from a late night during tax season 3 years ago. But I knew every sound it made. I knew exactly how much pressure to put on the brakes. I knew how it handled in the rain. "I accept the invitation for dinner." "Arthur," I said. Arthur smiled, stepping aside to usher me into his car. "However," I continued, staying exactly where I was, "I will not be riding with you." Arthur paused. He looked at me, his hand still holding the door of his luxury sedan. "I beg your pardon?" "I will drive myself," I said. I patted the roof of my gray sedan. "I am fond of this car. It is reliable. And more importantly, I know exactly where it is going because I am the one steering it." Arthur stared at me for a second, and then he threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, booming sound that startled the birds in the trees. It was the laugh of a man who was used to being obeyed, delighted to finally meet someone who defied him with logic. "Of course you will," Arthur said, shaking his head with a grin. "I offer you a ride in a $500,000 vehicle, and you choose the Toyota. You are stubborn. Linda Stratton." "I am independent. Arthur Vance," I corrected him. "There is a difference." "I am beginning to see that," he said, "and I suspect that independence is going to make you a very dangerous and very expensive chief financial officer." "You have no idea," I said. The rear window of the Rolls-Royce rolled down. Emily poked her head out. She was holding a juice box that one of the bodyguards must have found for her. "Are you coming, Linda?" she asked. "I'm right behind you." "Emily," I said, "I am going to follow you into the city." "Okay," she chirped, "but try to keep up. My dad drives fast." "I can handle speed," I promised her. "I just do not like crashes." Emily waved her hand. "Bye, Linda. See you at the steak place. Can I order the mac and cheese?" "You can order whatever you want," Arthur told his daughter. Getting into the car, he looked at me one last time before closing the door. 1 hour. Linda, do not be late. I bill my time at a very high rate." "So do I replied. The door of the Rolls-Royce closed with a heavy, final thud. The car pulled away, the tires crunching on the gravel, moving with the silent grace of a predator. I watched it go. I did not feel a longing to be inside it. I did not feel a wish for a Prince Charming to sweep me off my feet and rescue me from my mundane life. Arthur Vance was not my savior. He was my peer. He was an opportunity, not a solution. I had already solved my own life. I had saved myself long before he walked out of the shadows of the garden. I opened the door of my car and slid into the driver's seat. The fabric was rough against my legs compared to the silk I imagined lined Arthur's car. But it felt right. It felt real. I inserted the key and turned the ignition. The engine roared to life. A little noisy, a little rattling, but strong. It was the sound of my own hard work. It was the sound of overtime, of weekends spent in the office, of coffees bought at bodegas instead of cafes. It was the sound of $5 million in the bank and zero debt. I put the car in gear. I drove down the driveway, passing the scene of the crime one last time. Sarah was still screaming. My father was now holding his head in his hands. My mother was sitting on the curb, looking at the dirt on her shoes. They were trapped in the hell of their own making, a prison built of greed and superficiality. They had spent their lives chasing an image, and now the mirror had broken. leaving them with nothing but sharp edges. I did not feel happy for their pain. I was not a sadist, but I felt a deep, resonating satisfaction. The scales had balanced. The audit was complete. I drove through the iron gates, the ones that were meant to keep the commoners out, and turned onto the main highway. The sun had set, and the lights of New York City were beginning to glow on the horizon. They looked like diamonds, real ones. Not the cubic zirconia lies my sister wore. They sparkled with promise and energy. I rolled down the window, letting the wind whip through my hair. I turned on the radio. I didn't search for a sad song or a triumphant anthem. I just let the static hum for a moment before finding a station playing jazz. I was driving a 10-year-old car. I was wearing a suit that my mother hated. I was 36 and unmarried. And as I merged into the fast lane, accelerating toward a dinner that would double my salary and change the trajectory of my career, I smiled. I was Linda Stratton. I was the one who did the math. And for the first time in my life, the numbers were entirely in my favor. I pressed my foot down on the gas, leaving the Hamptons, the heartbreak, and the hypocrisy in my rearview mirror, fading into the dark until they were nothing more than a bad memory. My life was just beginning, and I was the one driving it. Thank you so much for listening to this story on BitterSweet Drama Stories. If you enjoyed watching Linda turn the tables on her toxic family and claim her independence, please take a moment to scroll down and leave a comment telling us where you are listening from. We love connecting with our community from all over the world. Do not forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and smash that hype button to help this story reach more people who need a reminder that sometimes the best revenge is just being successful and happy on your own terms. See you in the next story.